I'm Larry Penix. I am Director of Chaplain Services at Pikeville Medical Center. And I'm also a clergy in the area as well, in the United Methodist faith.
Wow. So you balance two big roles, leading a church and Director of Pastoral or Chaplain Services at the hospital. And how long have you been either a hospital chaplain or in pastoral ministry?
Okay, I have my full-time job is chaplain. That's my full-time, and I'm a part-time pastor, if you can call it that. I have a small church, and thankfully they're not real demanding, so I do a sermon and a Bible study, and make some visits. Thankfully, if they're in the hospital, I'm already there, so that works out real well. But I've been in ministry since, I think I announced my calling, if you want to call it that, in ministry in like 1981. So I have been in ministry for a long time. And chaplaincy, I have volunteer chaplains at various hospitals where I've lived and served as a pastor. But I've been at Pikeville Medical Center about 6 years, and almost 5 years full-time. But I started out in volunteer services as a volunteer chaplain, and then when an opportunity came for me to serve as a part-time chaplain, what they called us was, I think, part-time irregulars or something like that. I did that for a while, and then was able to get on as a full-time chaplain, and then just recently was promoted to director of chaplains.
Well, congratulations on your promotion. I know that so often people, when they think about pastor or they think about minister, they kind of see that role, no matter the title, as the same thing. But you and I both know there's a little difference between being a pastor and being a chaplain.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about the difference?
I'd love to, and I thank you for asking that question, because this is one of the things that people misunderstand. As a pastor, you are responsible for a local congregation, usually, maybe more than one, but usually, like in a Methodist church, I've had a couple churches. But it's pretty much the same group of people. They have a group of people that believe similar things, so you kind of agree to your doctrine, your faith, and that's pretty much your area there. So if you're Methodist, you're teaching and preaching to Methodist type, people. If you're Baptist, you're ministering to Baptist people. And so there's an understood doctrine, there's an understood manner sometimes of ministry. But as a chaplain, you're not exactly a pastor, although sometimes those roles do merge. You are ministering to people in a hospital setting of all kinds of backgrounds, both faith backgrounds and sometimes no faith. You're talking about people from all walks of life. And so in a hospital setting, you may be ministering to people who are Protestants, people who are Catholic. There may be people of all kinds of religions, really. And even in our hospital, when you include our staff and patients, it's just a wide variety. And so as a chaplain, you really aren't going in there to push your theology on them. One of the things in my training that I've learned is that it's about the patient. And we meet them where they are. Instead of me pushing my theology, I find out where they are in their faith journey. And we come alongside them and offer emotional and spiritual support to whoever that may be.
Now, I'm assuming at times that can even push you in your own boundaries or sense of understanding. And when you have a patient or family that maybe need things that you can't provide, are you expected to be all things to all people, or how do you balance that?
Another good question. As I said, we do minister to people of all kinds of backgrounds, but we do not have to compromise our own beliefs. We are able to provide for them in ways. It's sort of like a military chaplain or a chaplain that would work in a prison. you would have people request things that maybe you can't provide. For example, if someone asked me to do last rites or something, I could always call Father Rob here in town, and he could come over, and we've done that. Or if it's somebody that needs a different kind of faith that I'm not able to do, we have contact information, and we'll go out of our way to try to provide for people in order to support them in where they are.
That real patient-centered focus that you
Right.
provide, wherever a person's at, you want to be. Now, you mentioned earlier about a call, and I know that can be really slippery terms, but back in 1981, I sense that the idea of call then might look a little different than what it means to you now. But could you walk us through just a little bit of what you mean when you say call, and what's that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, it definitely was different, probably, but at the same time, I think for me, and I haven't always been in the Methodist Wesleyan tradition. I was brought up in the Baptist tradition, and so in that particular circle, you would maybe sense a call from God that He wants you to preach, to be able to become a preacher or whatever, and you would announce that, and you would pray about that, which is exactly what I did. I felt, at that time, when I really, I was a young man, but when I got serious with the Lord, I found a mentor. His name was Bruce. I named my son after him. He had a big impact in my life, and he was a person who had taken people who he kind of mentored them, other pastors in our area, and he helped me to develop that. In fact, when I first went to him, I told him, I said, I feel like God is calling me to the ministry, but I want to wait till I'm 30 years old. And at the time, I was like maybe 19 or 20, and I said, I don't feel like I'm ready. And of course, he counseled with me, and we prayed about it. And through his guidance, I guess I realized I'm never going to be ready. And I learned how to rely on the Lord. And so I remember it was on a service, was on a watch service, what's known as a New Year's Eve watch service in a Baptist church down in Johnson County, when I had told my pastor that I felt God calling me in the ministry, and he said, well, I want you to tell the church at the next service. And so I stood up on a New Year's Eve watch service in 1981 and announced that I felt God was calling me into the ministry. And it was a very powerful moment for me, and continues to be a very good memory for me. I had no idea at the time even what that all meant, but I just knew there was something from God that was tugging on my heart, that God wanted me to step up and just proclaim Him.
You know, I've heard from a lot of ministers or servants in the church that call is the thing that they have to hold on to in many difficult moments of their life. They just have to say, but God, I know you've called me. So when you think about the ups and downs and the trials of ministry, has there been a biblical figure or story that sustained you most?
Yes, I would say more than one, but of course, but I think of David, who as a young man was called to be a great king for God, but yet it would be many years before that would completely be fulfilled. And how that he was referred to as a man after God's own heart, but yet he failed God. He failed his family, and yet God still used him in a mighty way. And it's always given me hope, because I have come to realize that I have failed God in times of my life too, and yet even when I felt like I didn't deserve to be able to even talk about God or the name of Jesus, yet God has always been faithful to me, even when I haven't been faithful to Him. So that's been a big part of my life, just to realize that. And I think about the prodigal son and the story of how the Father just run and kissed him. And I used to, in growing up, I understood God more as this sort of a mean judge or whatever. And when I really began to understand the story of the prodigal son and realize that the Father, sometimes it's us who feels like we're not worthy, but God never does that. God is always waiting and running to us and just wanting a relationship with us. And we are the ones that hold back, not God. God never turns us away. So that's been a big part of my life to think about that.
A beautiful image of this kind of your self-understanding of God really growing into being this kind, gracious, loving God. In that story of David, the prodigal, you find yourself growing and evolving and being chased by God in some ways.
Yes.
You find yourself here now as a professional chaplain. If someone were watching this and they said, I kind of feel called by God, but I have no idea the steps it takes to be, a director of chaplain services. What were the steps that you took to get to where you're at today?
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, calling is a broad term. And sometimes when we feel like we're called, or we say that we're called by God, we may not even know what that calling is. And it took me years to understand that I believe I am now where God wanted me to be, but I didn't know that. If you'd asked me 10 years ago where I would be now, I would not have said I'm going to be the director of chaplains. That just would not have been anything that I would have ever imagined. But life circumstances and God's timing and God's ways are above our ways. And through different things, I had the opportunity to become a chaplain. And once I did, I wanted to be a good chaplain, and I wanted to learn, and I realized, I think I can do this. I think I have the skills, but I need more skills. And so I began to take some classes that's known as CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education. I know you're familiar with that because you've had some yourself. And for a couple years, I actually traveled to Louisville and took my clinical pastoral education classes and had to get 4 units. I did 4 units of that in Louisville, and one of the things that a lot of hospitals now are requiring is that the chaplains be clinical pastoral educated training, so CPE trained, and with at least some CPE, and then you can go on to get your certification, Board of Certification, and so I'm in that process right now. And so I would say if you want to be a full-time chaplain, in most hospitals now, more and more are requiring some education. So one, you need some type of a master level degree, and many of them require a Master of Divinity, which I have through Asbury Seminary. I have a Master of Divinity, and then CPE. And so you can go online and find APC website. You can find you can Google certification for chaplaincy, and you'll find places that can do that. And just know that some of them are accredited and some are not, but the ACPE is one that is accredited, nationally recognized by the National Board of Chaplaincy.
Mm. 2 last questions for you. Today, if a young doctor or nurse was watching this and they say, gosh, sometimes I just feel like the chaplains, what's their role in when I'm trying to take care of people? What would you say to young people who are being trained in a medical world? What's the value of having a chaplain on your team?
Well, not every hospital has a chaplain, and I want to just say I'm thankful for Pikeville Medical Center that they have the forethought and continue to support spiritual care. The great thing about our hospital, our mission is that we provide world-class health care in a Christian environment. And so I'm thankful for that, and they are very supportive of chaplain services. And one of the things that we do, we come alongside the doctors and nurses. We respond to traumas. Our hospital has traumas, rapid responses, any colds and those things. And we're there to support the families, the patients, and staff as well. It's a big thing right now. But one of the things that people may or may not realize is that doctors are very busy, as you know. They don't have time to sit down a lot of times, and I'm not saying all doctors, but because of their schedule, and even nurses, they don't always have the time to listen to someone's story, to find out, is this person having a spiritual crisis and those things. Although we encourage doctors to ask those questions, to do a sort of a spiritual analysis, just something like a physical thing that they do. But as chaplains, we can go in a room and just by interacting with the patient, do sort of a spiritual history of the patients, and also to find out if they are in a spiritual or emotional crisis. And that's something that takes time, and we may have to spend more than one visit with the patient. And if we determine that, yeah, I feel like this patient is suffering from some kind of a spiritual crisis right now. Maybe they are severed ties from their family or with God or whatever. Maybe they're angry, or maybe they're depressed. These are things that we work with alongside the doctors and people. We can refer people to social workers, counselors, and when it's out of our field of expertise. But emotional and spiritual help is something that we can do to help them in their ministry and their job.
Mm-hmm. Well, you sold me on why a chaplain should be in that healthcare team. The last question I have is for people who are struggling with the church. Especially right now in this pandemic where people are not able to go out to church. I've kind of wondered if this will even be in some ways a further disconnecting for some from the church. And people have lots of questions about why the church matters today. And as a pastor, a long-term pastor, what would be your appeal or approach to young people on why the church may still be important?
Yeah. Well, there has been a decline in church attendance in mainstream churches, as you know, for a while. And the church is sort of in a different situation, especially right now, where we are not able to meet in a group. And there's a trend toward younger people to, after they go to college, to sort of drop out of church. In the past, the trend was that after they got married and had a family, they would return. But that's not always the case now. Some of them were not even brought up in a church situation. But one thing I feel is that most people are searching. Most people are always wanting to know more about, and some people may say God, or there is a spirituality to people, and we may not even know what that is involved. But I think about right now with the fact that we're not meeting in churches. For example, my little church that I pastor, on a Wednesday night, we might have 10 people in our building. Right now, we're doing Facebook Live. My wife and I are doing a discussion in our living room, and we're having about 300 or 400 people on a Wednesday night visiting us, and that's on a Wednesday night service. We'd never have that many people on a regular Wednesday night service. And so we're being forced in a way to find new and innovative ways to reach people. And one thing I realized that a lot of our young people are very connected to the internet and their devices, and so they will tune into things like that where they may not attend a church. So I guess looking at it in the future, we've got to find ways to connect with people that may not always be having them come to our building. But I do believe that there are a lot of people right now who are searching for something spiritual, that they're looking for answers. They're looking for hope. And oftentimes, in all times through history, hope has been found in God. And so people have turned in crisis after crisis in our nation's history to God. And those are the times that when people do that. However, right now, the churches are closed, so it makes it more difficult. So I'm thankful that we have this technology available today that we've never had before for people to be able to connect in a way that they could not before.
Well, on behalf of all the patients and families, staff, on behalf of your church and everything you do in the community, thank you so much for, in 1981, saying yes to that call and following no matter the ups and downs. We really appreciate you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and I would just say that if anyone would like to talk more about the ministry of being a chaplain or anything we can do for you as a chaplain, pastor, you can call me, call Pikeville Medical Center. The number is 218-3500, that's area code 606-218-3500, and just ask for the chaplain.
All right, thank you so much.